friends. Today, I just wanted to share something with you guys that I'm taking out from my current study on portions. Before 2019 ended, I was starting this Bible study on portions. Don't get me wrong, I am not the best Christian there is. I just try to use my free time whenever I have free time, um, learning stories from the Bible because God always talks to me through Bible stories, much like a kid. And so I was studying about portions, as in Portions, portions. I don't know, I don't remember why I even began that study, but at first I thought I was going to deal more on David because in the Psalms, we have seen and we have heard David say countless times that God is his portion. So that was what's on my mind. But then again, the Lord had a different way of teaching me these things. And eventually, I found myself in the book of Genesis, specifically the chapters 30 up until 32, which is Jacob's story. Jacob is quite a funny guy. He's not the best person there is. He's quite deceitful. Actually, Jacob, his name means the one who deceives. Am I correct? Yeah, if I'm not mistaken. One who deceives. All throughout Jacob's life, he's been um, getting what he wants by deceiving people. Yeah, by deceiving people. That's what his life was all about. But then again, towards the end of chapter 32, this is the part where, I'm not sure, but this is quite a famous story in the Bible, wherein Jacob wrestled with God. And after Jacob wrestled with God, God blessed him, gave him a new identity. And but before that, I'm just going to zoom in to that area wherein Jacob and God was wrestling. It's quite a funny scene when I imagine it. I mean, why are they wrestling, right? So God was wrestling with Jacob, but it didn't say in that part of the Bible that it was God who was wrestling with Jacob. It just became clear towards the end because it's also towards the end that Jacob realized that it was God he was wrestling with. In fact, in the Bible, it just said that Jacob wrestled with a man after he was left alone. He was left alone because they all had to go to Esau. And what Jacob did was he sent everybody ahead of him so that he can be alone with God that night. And so the wrestle began, and then when it finally occurred to the man, which is God, and Jacob, that nobody's going to win, so you can see it was a very close fight because nobody seemed to be winning. God told Jacob, let go of me, it's daybreak. And Jacob answered the Lord, I am not letting go unless you bless me. And then God answered, what's your name? And then Jacob said, my name's Jacob. And then God said, your new name, I'm giving you a new name. Your new name is Israel. And Israel means one who strived with God and overcome God. So that's the whole new beginning story. But before that happened, before God blessed Jacob, he did something quite odd. Before he actually blessed Jacob, what he did, because Jacob was not letting go, he touched Jacob's thigh in such a way that it caused Jacob great pain, great injury, and it gave him a limp that he was going to bear for the rest of his life. And at first, I was zooming into the whole wrestle thing, and then I went into the whole new beginning, new identity thing, but something kept on nudging me. It was the limp. It was the freaking limp, because God gave Jacob a limp. What was that about? It was not necessary. What was all that about? That's the question that was in my mind. And so today I studied about the limp. I'm sure I'm not yet done with this study, but I keep looking here, sorry. But yeah, the biblical meaning of limp. I found a lot of meanings, but I'm just gonna zoom in and I'm just gonna tell you like the summary of what I understood. Um, Limps are a way of showing to the world that God chooses people who are flawed and imperfect. Because imagine a scenario wherein after the wrestle, Jacob is limping and he's going back to, his normal course of life. And people will see him and of course, they're going to ask, wow, who did that to you? And then imagine Jacob saying, oh God did this to me. And that's not very glorifying to the Lord, am I right? But then God chose it that way. Another thing is that limps are, based on the whole study, I realized that limps are reminders of not just the struggle, but the victory. Because the Lord said, you have struggled with God and you've survived. You you've succeeded. So the limp was not just a reminder of the struggle, but also um, the survival, but also the success. That's very important to note. Then another thing that I realized is that um, the limp was like a souvenir, as in God left Jacob something to remember that night from. So whenever Jacob looked at the limp, it would remind him of God's blessing and not just the struggling, not just the pain, right? Limps are not automatically good. In fact, if anything, it seems it's a physical manifestation that something is wrong. So it's quite funny that the Lord left a souvenir and it was a limp. So coming from all of that realizations, those are 4 points of realizations for me. I was, of course, applying it to my own life and I was asking myself, so what's my limp? What is it that the Lord wanted me to understand? And I realized that I've been so caught up with my old identity. I mean, the person that I used to be, which I'd like to believe isn't me anymore. But the, the funny thing is that every single day I remember that person and I cannot let go of the memories. I cannot let go of the pain. I cannot let go of the sadness that I'm just it's just so hard for me to be joyful because I always think that for me to glorify God, I have to be joyful, I have to be hopeful, I have to be someone whose faith is up there. But no, my faith is not like that, and I'm not very joyful right now. I am not a very bright person. I mean, people used to say probably 5 years ago that when they talk to me, they just get a new glimpse of like light and brightness, like morning, mercy. No, that's not me right now. I am just, I look at myself as one big block of sadness walking, walking this earth. That's not very far off actually. But, and I kept on struggling with that identity because I didn't want to do that all my life. I wanted my life to be a reflection of God's goodness. So I've always had that dilemma in my head. And today, I kind of realized what that was all about. I am mentally ill. A lot of people who know me IRL know that I do battle with depression and with major clinical depression and general anxiety disorder, which makes every day such a struggle for me. And no matter what I do to be happy, no matter what I do to be okay, I I'm happy for quite some time and then I fall back into this hole. I call it black hole days because it's very much like black hole days wherein I just circle around these negative thoughts and it seems like it's never gonna end, and it seems like it's gonna end into like a very black pit wherein I'm just sad and lonely and nobody's there and it's quite dark. But I do realize that it's just my head. Something is wrong with how my brain works, with how my mind works. Because I used to be a happy kid. Growing up, I had Not the perfect childhood, of course. A lot of my emotional trauma came from childhood, but I was a very hopeful girl. I remember that girl very, very vividly in my head. But yeah, right now I just couldn't seem to find that spirit anymore. And I felt so bad and ashamed because I felt like I was not glorifying God. In fact, writing is a gift that God gracefully gave me, and I love writing. I do write every single day, and I wanted to use that gift in order to glorify God. But it's very hard for me to write anything hopeful. Whenever I try to write, all that I write about would be about tragedy, about sadness. And I felt so bad because I was ashamed that I was not using my gift to glorify God, and I was just using my gift for myself to make me famous so that I will seem very relatable to younger people, to the younger generation. But then I realized that was not my intention. I just really wanted to write. And now I kind of, based on this Jacob story, I kind of pieced that together and realized that my mental illness, my sadness, the pains that I have in my heart, the emptiness that is here that I cannot seem to explain, and that has gone through everything that I do, that's my limp. That's the permanent damage that I got from struggling with God, with my circumstances, and it's not pretty. You know, when you see a person who has a limp, obviously you don't say, "Whoo, wonderful! That's amazing! That's beautiful." No, a limp is, if anything, a limp is very devastating to see. It's a physical manifestation that something terrible has gone wrong. It's the same way with my mental illness. This is the reason why when I write, I automatically write tragic things because it's the only way that my pain would manifest, and I have to get it out. That's my story. So, this is just a reminder to all my friends there who are not mentally ill, and other church members, church elders who still think that depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, any mental illness is a lack of faith and, you know, an imperfection in prayer discipline. I hope that you understand that our mental illness are just limps. They're limps. They're permanent damage that we got from struggling about something. But that's okay. There's nothing wrong with our limps. If anything, they are evidences of God's goodness. But let me tell you something, our limps are not gonna look beautiful. Limps are not supposed to be beautiful. If anything, like I said, they're supposed to look devastating and frustrating. But we have to accept it that way. We have to tell our story. Which brings me to my second point, which is that Jacob's story is just as important as the limp. People who would know Jacob's story would do would do either of these two things. First, they would walk away and just say, what kind of God limps people, gives people pain and injury, and then walks away and goes on with their own lives. And then the second thing that they can do is ask Jacob one very simple but very important question, which is, what happened to you? And that's the beginning of a good story telling session. What happened to Jacob was very important. His story was very important so that the limp would serve its purpose. It's the same thing as with me. My limp is important. The pain that I feel is important and valid. And your pain and your limp is important and valid as well. But your story is as important as your limp. You have to tell your story in order for the limp to actually serve its purpose. It's not, I mean, imagine the difference between these two scenarios. You're walking with a limp, somebody asks you what happened, and then you're gonna answer, some god just. And then another situation wherein somebody asks you what happened to you, why do you have a limp? And you can tell the person, do you want to go get some coffee? It's different. The story has to be reflected in the limp. And also to my friends who are mentally ill like me, there is nothing wrong with what you are feeling. Of course, it's difficult. It is a struggle to live with this every day. And I'm sad to say that this is permanent damage, much like a limp. And we're gonna have to live with this for like the rest of our lives. But the thing is, it shouldn't stop us from living. I mean, no matter how imperfect the life that we live is, I know it's dark, I know there are days when we don't want to get up. Just stay in bed. Just embrace all that comes along with it. There is nothing wrong with you. You are doing just fine. You're doing just fine. And when somebody makes you feel as though your limp is ugly and so devastating to see, accept that as well, because that's the truth. I'm not saying that it's easy to accept, it's very hard to accept, but in this side of the heaven, there really is not much we can do but just to keep walking despite the limp. So that's it. I hope that you got something from this. It's very rare that I share Bible devotions simply because it's hard to share them. I mean, a lot of my Bible reading and Bible studying friends would have to agree with me when I say that um, the way that the stories and the realizations come to you, it's amazing. But when you try to put them into words, it kind of loses its meaning. And it's kind of what's happening right now. I feel like the story and the discovery just lost its meaning. But I tried to get it out there because I feel like it's important for some people to know. And I also wanted to put it out there so that I can watch myself and remember it on days when, you know, the limp is too ugly to look at. So that's it for me tonight. Bye bye. Thank you.